getting back to her. Like, if she doesn't get back to me, that's fine. Like, she gets busy during the day. But she didn't get back to her people, which was very concerning. And Nicole called me when she was at the door, and that's when I came home. And then walked in the house, and nothing was vanished. Nothing was here. I mean, she wasn't here. The kids weren't here. Nope, nobody was here.
What's your wife's name?
Shanann, Shanann.
What's your kids' name?
Bella and Celeste.
How do you spell Celeste?
Celeste.
How old are your daughters?
4, Bella's 4, Celeste is 3.
And so, how many times did you try calling her?
I called her 3 times, texted her about 3 times just to say, what's going on. Like, because after I called her and texted her once, it's like maybe she was just busy. Like, she had just gotten back. Like, everybody's probably calling her from her trip. She just got back from Arizona, and I figured she was just busy. But when her friend showed up, that's what it was like. It registered. Like, all right, this isn't right.
Do you think she just took off? Do you think?
I mean, right now I don't even want to just like throw anything out there. Like, I hope that she's somewhere safe right now and with the kids. But I mean, could she just taken off? I don't know. But if somebody has her and they're not safe, like, I want them back now. Like, that's what's in my head. Like, if they're safe right now, they're gonna come back. But if they're not safe right now, that's the not knowing part. Like, if they're not safe, last night I had every light in the house on. I was hoping that I would just ran over by the kids running in the door and just like barrel rushing me, but it didn't happen.
If you believe every victim deserves to be remembered and every truth deserves to be told, subscribe to The Crime Narrator. These stories live on because you're here to hear them.
By 2026, the name Chris Watts still carried a heavy silence wherever it was spoken. Nearly a decade after the crimes that shocked the world, the man at the center of it all remained behind prison walls, physically confined, yet increasingly distant in ways even veteran guards struggled to explain. According to multiple correctional officers who have worked his unit over the past year, something about Watts has changed. Not in a dramatic, headline-grabbing way, but subtly, unsettlingly. Guards describe a man who no longer reacts like other inmates. No anger outbursts, no visible fear, no real emotion at all. Just long stretches of stillness, punctuated by moments that leave staff exchanging uneasy glances. One guard reportedly said, "It's not that he causes trouble, it's that he doesn't seem present anymore." Watts allegedly spends hours sitting upright on his bunk, staring at nothing. He rarely asks questions, rarely speaks unless spoken to, and when he does, his responses are calm to the point of being mechanical, as if rehearsed, stripped of feeling. This isn't the Chris Watts the public remembers from interrogation footage or courtroom photos.
And to go into their rooms and know that I wasn't going to turn the rain machines on, and I know that I wasn't going to turn their monitor on, and know I wasn't going to kiss them to bed tonight. It was that's why last night was just horrible. I couldn't do it. I want everybody to just come home. Like, wherever they're at, come home. That's what I want. The nation. So she's supposed to get home like 11. She got home at like 1:48. She got in bed about 2.
What was she going for? Like, family trip or what?
It was a Thrive direct sales. It was a local event that was down there between a bunch of leaders in the company.
And that day she was back, I mean,
I left work early that morning, like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much.
And this might be a tough question, but did you guys get into an argument before she left?
It wasn't like an argument. We had an emotional conversation, but I'll leave it at that. But I just want them back. I just want them to come back. And if they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart. Because if they are safe, they're coming back. But if they're not, this has got to stop.
Back then, there were nerves, tears, visible stress. In 2026, guards say what they see instead is something colder, empty, almost detached from reality itself. Psych staff have reportedly taken note, though no official diagnosis has been released. Prison officials remain tight-lipped, offering only standard statements about inmate privacy and ongoing evaluations. But whispers travel fast in places like this, and among the guards, a quiet consensus is forming. Whatever time has done to Chris Watts, it hasn't softened him. It's altered him. And that raises a disturbing question. What really happens to a mind forced to live forever with what it's done? This chapter is just the beginning. What guards are now saying may change how the public sees Chris Watts all over again. Backhand index pointing right if you want to continue this story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these deep dives coming, and the next chapter gets even darker. By the time the night shift clocks in, the prison settles into an eerie rhythm, and that's when guards say Chris Watts feels the most unsettling. Chapter 2 of this story begins not with noise or violence, but with silence so thick it makes seasoned officers uneasy. Several guards have independently described the same detail. Watts' eyes. Not anger, not fear, just an unblinking, fixed stare that seems to look through whoever stands in front of him. One officer recalled doing a routine head count when Watts slowly lifted his gaze and locked eyes with him, without speaking, without blinking, for nearly a full minute. It felt like he was studying me, the guard later said. Not threatening, just watching. In 2026, Watts reportedly no longer participates in most prison programs. He declined group counseling. He avoids recreation when possible. When other inmates talk, argue, or complain, Watts remains still, hands folded, posture straight, eyes forward. Guards say he follows every rule perfectly, almost obsessively. No infractions, no emotional reactions, nothing that would justify disciplinary action. That perfection is what troubles them. One correctional officer described it as inhuman calm. Another said, "It's like he's pretending to be normal, but forgot what normal feels like." Even during medical checks, Watts reportedly answers questions before they're fully asked, using the same tone every time, the same phrases, the same pauses. Repetition without variation. Psych staff have quietly increased their observations. While no public records confirm a diagnosis, internal notes reportedly flag emotional detachment and flattened affect. In simple terms, Watts shows almost no emotional range. And yet there are moments. Guards say that sometimes, late at night, Watts can be heard whispering to himself. Not shouting, not crying, just murmuring words that can't quite be made out. When approached, he stops immediately and returns to silence as if flipping a switch. The question everyone inside is asking, but no one wants to answer, is this deterioration or something far more calculated? What unsettled prison staff the most in early 2026 wasn't something Chris Watts did. It was something that never officially happened. According to two separate guards, an incident occurred during a routine cell inspection that, for reasons still unclear, never made it into the formal logbook. Watts had been instructed to step out of his cell while officers conducted a standard search. He complied instantly, hands behind his back, expression neutral. Nothing unusual until the search ended. As the guards prepared to escort him back inside, Watts reportedly spoke without being prompted. "You missed it," he said calmly. One guard paused, assuming he meant contraband. When asked what he was referring to, Watts tilted his head slightly and replied, "The thing you were looking for. You didn't see it." The cell had already been cleared. No weapons, no notes, no hidden items, nothing out of place. When pressed further, Watts said nothing more. He simply stepped back into his cell and sat on his bunk, eyes fixed on the wall. Here, where the story gets strange. Later that shift, one of the guards returned alone to recheck the cell off the books. Still nothing. No hidden compartments. No markings. No objects missing or added. Yet the guard reported feeling an overwhelming sense of unease, describing it as the sensation of being observed from inside the room, despite being alone. The incident was discussed briefly among staff but ultimately never filed. No supervisor explanation, no written follow-up, just an unspoken agreement to move on. But word spread anyway. In the weeks that followed, guards began reporting similar interactions. Watts anticipating questions before they were asked, commenting on things officers hadn't spoken aloud, and correcting small details about procedures he shouldn't have known.
It's got to stop. Like, somebody has to come forward.
Have you spoken to her family, like her parents?
Yeah, they've been in constant contact, like every hour. I mean, everybody back in North Carolina and the East Coast. I mean, from Maine to Florida.
What is her parents saying to you? Like,
They're just like if they need to get on a flight, just let them know, because I mean, they feel helpless right now because they're on the opposite side of the country. I mean, Colorado is, I mean, you can't just drive around and look. I mean, it's just like you wouldn't really know what you're looking for. That's what the cops pretty much told me. That first day, I was like, I want to get out and drive around. They said, you wouldn't know what to look for.
Last couple questions. What is law enforcement? What have the police or the sheriffs or your neighbors? Is anybody? What's police saying to you?
Right now, this is what they're doing right now is with the canines in the sense. I think this is the biggest thing. This is the biggest thing they've done so far, because yesterday the Frederick Police Department did all the searching of the house and tried to gather whatever information they could, and with the detectives, officers, and sergeants. And today it's, I mean, obviously with.
None of it was overtly threatening, but all of it felt wrong. One veteran officer summed it up quietly. He's not breaking rules, he's breaking expectations. Whether Watts is unraveling psychologically or deliberately cultivating this aura of control remains unclear. What is clear is that the silence surrounding these moments is growing louder. By mid-2026, concerns about Chris Watts had reached the prison's mental health unit, but not in the way most cases do. Usually inmates request evaluations. Watts never did. Instead, the request came from staff. 3 separate officers filed informal notes, again, not official reports, expressing concern that Watts' behavior had shifted in ways they couldn't explain. He wasn't violent. He wasn't disruptive. In fact, he was calmer than ever. Too calm. A senior prison psychologist agreed to conduct a routine assessment. What happened during that session would quietly alter how Watts was viewed inside the facility. The evaluation began normally. Watts answered questions politely, maintained eye contact, and showed no signs of agitation. He spoke about his daily routine with precision, even correcting the psychologist on the timing of meals and count procedures, details most inmates barely track.
It's made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family as well as the Watts family that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could.
Then the tone shifted. When asked how he felt emotionally, Watts paused longer than expected. Finally, he said, "I don't feel the same things anymore. I understand them. I just don't experience them." The psychologist asked him to explain. Watts described emotions the way someone might describe weather patterns, accurate, detached, and distant. He could identify sadness, guilt, fear, but insisted they no longer belonged to him. They're ideas, he said, not feelings. What disturbed the psychologist most wasn't the lack of emotion. It was Watts' certainty. He showed no confusion, no distress, no struggle to articulate his thoughts. His affect was flat, but his cognition was sharp, extremely sharp. At one point, the psychologist asked if Watts ever thought about his victims. Yes, he replied, but not the way people expect. When asked what he meant, Watts smiled faintly and said, "I think about how permanent it is."
A maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole.
That comment alone prompted an internal recommendation for continued monitoring. But the final note, never added to the official record, was more alarming. The psychologist wrote that Watts exhibited a profound emotional detachment inconsistent with typical institutional adaptation, and warned that his mental state appeared to be progressing, not stabilizing. No diagnosis was made, no intervention ordered. But after that session, guards noticed something else. Watts was being watched more closely, even when no one admitted it. By late summer of 2026, the strangest reports about Chris Watts didn't come from daytime interactions. They came from the overnight shift. Prison nights are predictable. After final count, most inmates settle into a restless quiet, coughing, murmured conversations, the occasional argument. Watts' cell, however, had become an exception. Guards began noticing that he never slept in the usual way. According to 2 night officers, Watts would lie flat on his bunk for hours, eyes open, unmoving, not staring at the ceiling, not shifting, just still. When flashlights passed over his face during routine checks, his eyes were already open, as if he'd been waiting. One guard later said, "It didn't feel like we were checking on him. It felt like he was checking on us." The logs showed nothing abnormal. Watts followed every rule. He never left his bunk, never spoke after lights out, never requested medical attention. But officers noticed a pattern. He seemed to know exactly when they'd appear. Seconds before footsteps reached his cell, his eyes would open wider, focused on the door. Then came the whispering reports. Not shouting, not talking, whispering, barely audible, low and controlled. At first, guards assumed he was speaking to himself. But when one officer stopped outside his cell and listened, the whisper stopped instantly. When the officer moved again, it resumed. No one could make out words, just rhythm, measured, almost rehearsed. One night a guard broke protocol and asked quietly, "Who are you talking to?" Watts didn't hesitate. "No one," he said. "I'm organizing my thoughts." That answer unsettled staff more than silence would have. Soon after, officers noticed Watts had begun standing at the edge of his cell during early morning count, already awake, already dressed, already facing the door. Always calm, always expressionless, always prepared. A veteran guard later admitted, "Most inmates fear the night. He seemed to own it." By the end of the month, informal warnings circulated among staff. Don't linger at his cell, don't engage after dark, and never assume he's asleep. Because according to those watching him most closely, Chris Watts never really was. By the fall of 2026, the tension surrounding Chris Watts had reached a breaking point, not because of something he did, but because of what one guard finally put into writing. Officer Daniel R., a 10-year veteran known for keeping his head down, submitted an incident report after a routine morning count. On paper, it looked harmless. No rule violations, no threats, no physical confrontation, but the wording stopped supervisors cold. It began with a detail others had noticed but never documented. Watts had spoken first. As Officer Daniel approached the cell, Watts stepped forward, already standing at attention. Before the guard could speak, Watts said calmly, "You're covering for Mark today. He called in sick." The officer froze. That information hadn't been shared yet. The schedule change had been discussed minutes earlier, out of earshot, behind a secured door. Daniel asked how he knew. Watts tilted his head slightly, as if confused by the question. "You talk louder than you think," he replied. But the officer was certain. No one had spoken near the cell. The report continued with another unsettling exchange. As Daniel turned to leave, Watts added almost casually, "You should tell your wife not to worry. The headaches will pass." Daniel didn't respond. He finished his round. But later that day, he learned his wife had complained of migraines, something he hadn't shared with anyone at work. That detail pushed the report beyond odd and into concerning. When supervisors reviewed it, they debated classification, psychological manipulation, coincidence, guard fatigue. In the end, they filed it under inmate behavior, non-threatening. Unofficially, though, the reaction was different. Daniel requested reassignment away from Watts' unit. Other guards quietly admitted similar moments, comments that felt too specific, too timely, too personal. None had written them down, until now. A senior officer summarized it best in a closed meeting. "He's not violent, he's not disruptive, but he gets inside your head without raising his voice." From that day forward, guards were instructed to limit conversation with Watts to absolute necessity. No small talk, no reactions, no personal information. Because once the report existed, one thing became clear. Whatever Chris Watts was doing, it wasn't accidental. The new rules were subtle, but Chris Watts noticed immediately. By late 2026, guards no longer lingered at his cell. Conversations were clipped, procedural, stripped of tone. Meals were delivered without eye contact. Counts were conducted in silence. Even routine instructions sounded rehearsed, as if everyone had agreed on the same script. For most inmates, this would have been unremarkable. For Watts, it was different. According to internal notes later leaked to investigators, Watts began reacting to the silence in unexpected ways. Not with anger, but with adjustment. He stopped initiating conversation, stopped asking questions, stopped trying to read faces. Instead, he watched. One guard described the shift as unsettling calm. Watts would stand at the back of his cell during rounds, hands folded, eyes tracking movement with slow precision. When spoken to, he responded instantly, politely, never asking for clarification, as if he already knew what was coming. The most disturbing moment came during a routine cell inspection. As Officer Lena M. finished her check, she paused, double-checking the lock. Without turning around, Watts spoke softly. "You missed the vent screw." She hadn't, but she looked anyway. Later, reviewing footage, supervisors confirmed the screw had been loose, something no one had noticed during prior inspections. Watts had never left his cell. No one could explain how he knew. After that, guards began requesting backup for tasks that previously required none. Not because Watts was dangerous, but because being alone near him felt wrong. A psychologist assigned to the facility noted something chilling in her evaluation. Watts appeared to be responding to isolation by internalizing control. The silence hadn't weakened him. It had sharpened him. He doesn't push boundaries anymore, she wrote. He anticipates them. The final entry in that month's log came from a senior supervisor. Inmate Watts is no longer attempting to influence staff. This may indicate resignation or escalation. No one knew which, and that uncertainty spread faster than fear ever could. By the end of 2026, the file on Chris Watts had doubled in size. Not because of new crimes, not because of outbursts or violations, but because of what wasn't happening. Watts had become invisible in plain sight. No disciplinary reports, no requests, no complaints. He followed routines with mechanical precision, waking seconds before lights on, standing for count before orders were given, returning to his bunk at the exact same time each night. Guards noted that he no longer reacted to changes in schedule, lockdowns, inspections, staffing swaps, as if the unpredictability no longer registered as stress. That's when prison officials ordered a full behavioral review. The conclusion was unsettling. Psychologists wrote that Watts showed advanced emotional detachment paired with heightened environmental awareness. He wasn't dissociating. He wasn't deteriorating. He was adapting too well. One guard summarized it bluntly during a closed-door briefing. He doesn't feel like an inmate anymore. He feels like someone waiting. Waiting for what, no one could say. When Watts was informed of a routine transfer review, standard procedure, he simply nodded and replied, "That won't happen." It didn't. When asked during evaluation if he felt remorse, Watts paused longer than usual, then answered calmly, "That depends on how you define it." That response was flagged. Ended with a line that circulated quietly among staff, but was never meant for the public. Inmate Watts does not present as unstable. He presents as resolved. For guards who had worked near him for years, that was worse than any outburst could have been. Resolved meant finished changing, finished reacting, finished unraveling. And that's why today, some prison guards still say the same thing when asked about Chris Watts. He's not normal anymore. Not because he's loud. Not because he's violent. But because nothing about him seems unfinished. Backhand index pointing right if you made it to the end. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories and updates you won't hear anywhere else.